Buckle up. We are heading into the final hours of voting and the first results in one of the most consequential midterm elections ever.
It's the high-stakes finish to a fever-pitch campaign.
Are you ready to win this election?
I love to win.
Voters making big choices in a nation on edge.
With high prices,
crime is rising.
the constant threat of gun violence,
the woman's right to choose.
What's happening across the U.S. could shake up the balance of power in Congress and shape the next race for the White House.
So speak out, get engaged, vote, vote, vote.
Tonight, Democrats are fighting to hold on to the Senate, knowing a loss of just one seat could cost them the majority.
We need a senator that understands what Pennsylvania's going through, not some guy that has 10 gigantic mansions.
The poster child for the far-left radical part of the Democratic Party, John Fetterman.
Republicans are aiming to win back the House and take back the Speaker's gavel.
We must change direction in Washington.
Everything is at stake.
Both parties hoping to expand their influence by winning governor's offices across the nation.
We will never, ever surrender to the woke agenda.
Governor DeSantis only cares about the White House. He doesn't give a damn about your house.
It's a critical test of the current president's agenda.
We'll get it done because we're already getting it done.
And the former president's grip on the GOP.
Welcome to the new Republican Party.
Will this election set the wheels in motion for a Biden-Trump rematch?
Trump and the extreme MAGA Republicans have made their choice, full of anger, violence, hate, and division.
Watching our country go to hell, we may have to do it again.
This is CNN's coverage of election night in America. The races for Congress, the contest for governor, and the future of American democracy.
We're taking our state back by storm.
Our democracy is on this ballot.
The people are choosing, the world is watching, and anything is possible until the last vote.
And we are live in Washington on a very suspenseful night in American politics. Voters are deciding control of the United States Congress and the direction of the country over the next 2 years. Welcome to CNN's special coverage of election night in America. I'm Jake Tapper. This is the first major election since President Biden took office, and it's the first chance for voters nationwide to weigh in on his record at a moment when so many Americans are struggling with high inflation and economic anxiety. Republicans believe that will work to their advantage as they fight to win the 218 House seats they need to reclaim the majority. That's 5 more seats than they have now. The battle will take place in 82 key House races, competitive contests that could go either way. In the closely divided Senate, Republicans need 51 seats to take back control. That's only 1 more seat than they have now. We're watching 13 key races that will be crucial to the fight for the Senate. Another factor in this election, former President Donald Trump, who has endorsed a slew of Republicans who support his false claims about the 2020 election. Some of them could have influence over certifying the results in 2024 or refusing to do so if they win tonight. That includes some of the candidates for governor and races playing out in 36 states across the nation, among them the pivotal battlegrounds of Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, and Florida. Covering all of this tonight, Dana Bash, Abby Phillip, Chris Wallace, and our entire election team. John King is over at the Magic Wall. He'll help us make sense of the results by mapping out the races district by district. As we await the first votes, Casey Hunt is standing by. She's following all 35 Senate contests, including the crucial key races. Boris Sanchez will be reporting results from those 36 governors contests across the U.S. David Chalian's here, too. He's getting ready to roll out the first exit polls on what voters are thinking. And Brianna Keeler's at our voting desk, keeping tabs on how the ballots are being counted in each state and any issues at polling places. We also have correspondents spread out across the country at candidates' headquarters and at vote counting centers. They're also right here in Washington, D.C. First, let's go to Manu Raju. He's at the headquarters of House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy. Manu, how confident is McCarthy feeling right now?
About Republicans need a net gain of 5. Polls close in Virginia. That is a big early clue.
All right, John, thanks so much. We are just moments away from the first big round of poll closings and the first actual results from the critical battleground state of Georgia. The Senate race there among a handful of contests that will decide which party controls the chamber. And we are ready to make our first projection. CNN is projecting that incumbent Republican Senator Tim Scott will be re-elected, defeating Crystal Matthews. There are 4 Senate races that are too early right now, too early to call. Those races are, not surprisingly, the big Senate race in Georgia between incumbent Democrat Raphael Warnock and football star Herschel Walker. Too early to call. Also too early to call. Races in Vermont. There is an open Senate seat between Congressman Peter Welch and the challenger Malloy. Too early to call in Vermont. Too early to call in Indiana. Incumbent Senator Todd Young running for re-election. That race, too early to call. And then Kentucky, incumbent Senator Rand Paul. Too early to call right now. He is running for re-election. Let's look at the balance of power in the Senate at this hour right now. Remember, Democrats have 36 Senate seats. Republicans currently have 30 seats. 34 seats remain. And we'll be bringing those to you over the next few hours. 34 seats. Republicans only need to pick up one seat to win and regain control of the U.S. Senate. Let's go back to Georgia now, because Nick Valencia is at a voting location in Atlanta, Georgia, the biggest city in the country. And Nick, you have new information. Hotly contested. Let's go to Casey Hunt. Casey, what are you seeing?
Yes, they are, Jake. We are finally starting to get some votes in this race that we have been talking about literally for months. Raphael Warnock out to an early lead, 75% of the vote. He's ahead by about 15,000 votes of Herschel Walker right now, who's coming in at 24.1%. Obviously, we're going to need to ask John King at the Magic Wall exactly where this vote is coming from, because we do not expect this race to be quite so lopsided as our early totals are showing us. Again, just 1% of the vote in here. And Chase Oliver, that Libertarian candidate, he could be the one that decides whether this race goes to a runoff, because if he picks up enough and neither one of these men is above 50, we could be looking at 4 more weeks of this. Let's check in on Florida, where we are also starting to get votes. Remember, Florida counts pretty early. Val Demings out to an early lead, 63.5%, to Marco Rubio's 35.7%. Another one where we're really going to want to know where the votes are coming in here, because we do expect this to tighten as the night goes on. Just 5% of the votes in Florida. Boris, I think you've got some updates on the governor's race.
It's still very early. We're going to take a quick look at Georgia to start right now. Stacey Abrams has a lead over incumbent Republican Brian Kemp. Abrams leading by about 13,000 votes. A lopsided advantage, but keep in mind, only 1% of the vote in the Peach State, a very important state for control of the U.S. Senate. Let's get an update now, a key race alert from the state of Florida, because there, Charlie Crist, the Democrat, also in the lead against incumbent Republican Ron DeSantis. He's ahead about 100,000 votes, but only 5% of the vote in so far in the Sunshine State, Jake.
All right, well, these are just the votes coming in right now.
Candidate was leading in the Florida Senate race. Now the Republican incumbent Marco Rubio is leading. And as we get ahead, we're about to get, when it comes to the Senate, we're about to get Ohio. And when it comes to the House, we get many more competitive districts, Jake, in the moments ahead. And again, results coming in Virginia, competitive districts in New Hampshire. We'll have a good sense in the next 30 minutes or so how the House is looking.
All right, John King, polls are closing in 3 more states. 2 of them, Ohio and North Carolina, have high-stakes U.S. Senate races, so we're watching very closely. So here is a key race alert. CNN is saying it is too early to call. Too early to call the Ohio Senate race between J.D. Vance and incumbent Congressman Tim Ryan, both of them squaring off for an open U.S. Senate seat. Too early to call in Ohio. In North Carolina, another open Senate seat from another Republican retiring. That race as well between Sherry Beasley and Congressman Ted Budd. That race also too early to call. The overall balance of power right now in the U.S. Senate, Democrats control 36 U.S. Senate seats. Republicans control 30 U.S. Senate seats. 34 seats remain. Remember, Republicans only need to pick up 1 net Senate seats. Let's go to Boris Sanchez right now, who has a projection when it comes to governor's races. Boris.
Jake, this is our first projection in a governor's race for the evening, and it comes from the state of Ohio. There, incumbent Republican Mike DeWine thread a needle. He was both critical of Donald Trump after the January 6th insurrection and then earned the former president's endorsement after the Republican primary. He defeats the Democratic mayor of Dayton, Ohio, Nan Whaley. Let's get some key race alerts now, beginning with the state of Florida. Last time we checked in, the former Republican governor turned Democratic Congressman Charlie Crist had the lead. Now it belongs to Ron DeSantis, more than 285,000 votes ahead, with 44% of the vote in Florida. Let's get an update now on the state of Georgia. There, still very early, but legendary vote mobilizer Stacey Abrams is ahead. 73,000 votes against incumbent Republican Brian Kemp. Only 13% of the vote in there. So we will likely watch that potentially change throughout the night as we turn it over to Casey Hunt, who has some Senate races.
We sure will. Thank you very much, Boris. And I do want to start actually in Georgia, because we are starting to get some numbers where we can compare things a little bit. So let's take a look at this. Raphael Warnock sitting at 60.1%. But look at that Herschel Walker number, 38.5%. That is different from the Republican gubernatorial candidate Brian Kemp, who sits at 42.6%. So again, we want to check with John King on this, but some early signs that perhaps as expected, Herschel Walker's underperforming Brian Kemp, the gubernatorial candidate there. We still expect this race to tighten considerably, only 13% of the vote in here. Let's go now to Florida, where Marco Rubio has taken the lead, probably as many of you expected. He's sitting now at 54% to Val Deming's 45%. Florida's going to count these votes relatively quickly. We've got 45% of the vote in there, but we're obviously going to keep watching it through the night. Let's go north now, though, to New Hampshire, where we are just starting to get votes in to this state, which swings so often with a wave when we see one. Maggie Hassan out to a relatively early lead. Again, there's only a few thousand votes in here, but she's sitting at 59.2% to Don Bolduc's 39.6%. This is one where Republicans started to take more interest, were encouraged by how things were moving late, but Hassan's team has been feeling good throughout the night so far. We've got 1% of the vote in New Hampshire, Jake.
That's only 1%. Got a lot more votes to count. John King, let's take a look at governor's races right now in the United States.
The one that jumps out at you is Georgia at the moment, in the sense that New Hampshire would be status quo. It's a Republican governor, Chris Sununu. Again, 1% of the vote in. Governor Sununu ahead by 9 points there, if you round. Not a surprise, but we'll watch it as we play out through the night. South Carolina, Henry McMaster, heavily favored in this race. The early results, pretty close. But again, it's 1% of the vote as you watch it in. But what jumps out at you, Florida, just because we brought it up earlier, when Charlie Crist was ahead, Ron DeSantis has now pulled ahead in the state of Florida. You're seeing some of the rural counties fill in with the red, up to about 48% of the estimated vote. We'll watch this as it plays out. But Governor DeSantis pulling ahead. And we mentioned earlier, Republicans said they could perform in Miami-Dade.
And look at that.
And look at that. They're leading right there. If this stays red, it's fascinating in the governor's race and the Senate race. And there'll be a lot of conversation about this as we head out of 2022 into the 2024 cycle, if this stays red. We're at 60%, or if it turns just blue and it's close, because that has been overwhelmingly Democratic in recent years.
Including that critical Senate contest in the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that could go a long way toward deciding control of the U.S. Senate. As of right now, CNN is projecting that Senator Marco Rubio, the Republican from Florida, will be reelected, defeating Congresswoman Val Demings. In Alabama, CNN is projecting that Katie Britt will win her Senate seat, defeating her opponent. She is a former staffer for the retiring Republican Dick Shelby in that Alabama Senate seat, so that's a hold for Republicans. In Oklahoma, CNN is projecting that incumbent Senator James Lankford will win. In the special election in Oklahoma, CNN is projecting that Markwayne Mullin will be elected, defeating Kendra Horn. And then in Kentucky, CNN is projecting that incumbent Republican Senator Rand Paul will be reelected. The big Senate race in Pennsylvania, CNN is declaring to be too early to call, and the big Senate race that's between Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman and TV's Dr. Mehmet Oz, too early to call as of right now. And in New Hampshire, a competitive race between incumbent Democratic Senator Maggie Hassan against retired General Don Bolduc. Again, too early to call. Let's look at the map in general right now. Right now, we have no projection in Connecticut, Illinois, Maryland, Missouri, and then, as I said, New Hampshire and Pennsylvania. Too early to call right now. The overall balance of power in the U.S. Senate, Democrats have 36 of the Senate seats. Republicans have 35 Senate seats. There are 29 seats remaining. That's what the rest of the night is about. Remember, Republicans only need to pick up one net seat from the Democrats in order to regain control of the Senate. But we have governor's races for you as well, and Boris Sanchez has those.
Jake, we have two projections to bring you from the South, including a major win for Republicans in the state of Florida. Governor Ron DeSantis winning re-election by a considerable margin. Right now, DeSantis is up nearly 16 percentage points. That's notable because Donald Trump won the state of Florida in 2020 by about 3.5 points. DeSantis, of course, widely speculated that he may run for president. Trump certainly thinks so with some of his recent attacks on the Florida governor, who earns a return trip to the governor's mansion in the Sunshine State. We also have a projection to bring you from Ruby Red, Alabama, a state that Donald Trump won, earning about 60% of the vote in 2020. There, incumbent Republican Kay Ivey, a staunch Trump supporter, she defeats rehabilitative therapist Yolanda Flowers to win another 4 years in Alabama. We also have a key race alert to bring you now. From the Peach State in Georgia, right now, Democratic activist Stacey Abrams, 44, it just changed, 38,000 votes ahead of incumbent Republican Brian Kemp. The lead thinning there with the last update, still only 31% of the vote in Georgia. We'll see where that winds up as the night moves along. Let's take a step back and look at the big picture. States where polls have closed, but where it is too early for CNN to make a projection. We're talking about Connecticut, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, as well as Rhode Island and the volunteer state of Tennessee. Let's turn it over now to Casey Hunt, who has some updates for us from Senate races. Casey.
Yeah, and Boris, let's start in Georgia because you just gave us an update on the governor's race there. Let's compare it to where things stand in the Senate race. Raphael Warnock up at 54.5% to Herschel Walker's 43.9%. So that spread between where the Republican Governor Kemp is at 48.2% right now has widened. Walker is just at 43.9%. That has to be giving some of the Democrats I've been talking to throughout the night a little bit of relief. We got, though, a third of the vote in here. We do, of course, expect this to be one of the tightest on the map. Let's take a look at North Carolina, where the Democrat Sherry Beasley has an early lead over Republican Ted Budd. Remember, this is retiring Republican Senator Richard Burr's seat, so a Democratic win here would represent a pickup for them, although we do expect this race to tighten through the evening. We have about 46% of the vote in North Carolina right now. Now let's go check in on Ohio, where the Democratic Congressman Tim Ryan is out to an early lead of 58.1% to the Republican J.D. Vance's 41.8%. With a spread that wide, we really do have to ask where those votes are coming from. We've only got about 20% of the vote in Ohio right now. And let's also check in on New Hampshire, where Maggie Hassan is at 64.1% to the Republican Don Baldock's 35.4%. She's about 13,000 votes ahead, so that tells you where we are in the vote count. We're not very far in. We are at 8%, but you'd rather be Maggie Hassan at this hour than Don Baldock, Jake.
All right, Casey, thanks so much. Appreciate it. John King,
Pennsylvania.
Thanks, John King. And we have some projections for you now. 3 projections for Republicans running for the House of Representatives. In Florida, Trump-endorsed Army veteran Corey Mills, CNN is projecting, has won a seat representing Seminole County. Republican Air Force veteran Ana Paulina Luna, CNN is projecting, has won a red-leaning district that includes St. Petersburg. She formerly worked at Turning Point USA, a pro-Trump youth organization. In Florida, Republican Laurel Lee is the winner in a newly drawn Tampa area district. She is a former Florida Secretary of State. Let's look at the balance of power now in the House of Representatives. 19 Democrats have been elected, 45 Republicans, including 3 pickups. There are still 371 seats remaining. Needing to control, of course, is 218. What's the state of play in the 83 competitive U.S. House seats that we've isolated? Well, Republicans need to win 27 of them. That's down from 30, so they're on their way. Democrats need to win 53 of those competitive seats. That's the same number we had before. So we do have right now Republicans having some momentum. It's very early. I don't want anyone to draw any conclusions, but these are 3 Republican projected wins in the House of Representatives. And so if you're sitting at the National Republican Congressional Committee, you're thinking this is what we need. Another chance to make projections as polling places close in Arkansas. And CNN is making a projection right now. CNN is projecting that incumbent Republican Senator Todd Young will be reelected in the state of Indiana, the Hoosier state, getting another term with Senator Todd Young. In Arkansas, it is too early to call between incumbent Senator John Bozeman and Democrat Natalie James. Too early to call at this moment right now. Let's take a look at the balance of power right now in the U.S. Senate. Democrats hold 36 seats. Republicans hold 36 seats as well. 28 seats remain. Remember, you need 51 seats to control the U.S. Senate. Republicans need to pick up 1 net seat from the Democrats in order to win control. of the U.S. Senate. Let's talk about governor's races now. Boris Sanchez has more there.
Jake, we have three projections to bring you, all three of them Republican holds, beginning in the state of New Hampshire. Chris Sununu, there are rumors he may run for president in 2024. Sununu winning a fourth term, defeating physician Tom Sherman. Meantime, in the state of South Carolina, not a competitive race there. The incumbent Republican Henry McMaster defeating former Democratic Congressman Joe Cunningham to win another 4 years. An update now from Tennessee, another reliably red state. Donald Trump won 60-ish% of the vote there in 2020. Bill Lee winning re-election. The incumbent Republican defeating ICU physician Jason Martin. Let's get a look at some key race alerts now, beginning with that all-important race we will not stop talking about in the state of Georgia. The last time we checked, Stacey Abrams had the lead. Now that has flipped. Brian Kemp, the incumbent Republican, leads with roughly 40,000 votes, with 42% of the vote in. Notably, Kemp above that 50% threshold, meaning he could avoid a runoff. Let's get a look at Texas now. Former Democratic Congressman Beto O'Rourke with a 60,000 vote advantage right now over incumbent Republican Greg Abbott, about 26% of the vote in Texas. An update now, a key race alert from the state of Michigan. Incumbent Democrat Gretchen Whitmer, I should say, locked in a tough re-election battle against conservative commentator Tudor Dixon. Right now, Whitmer sitting 55,000 votes ahead, still very, very early in the night in Michigan, only 3% of the vote in there. We also have a key race alert to bring you from the state of Pennsylvania, where Attorney General Josh Shapiro has a 287,000 vote advantage over Doug Mastriano. Remember, Mastriano's an election denier who tried to overturn the 2020 election results in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Still early there, though, only 8% of the vote in. Let's turn it over to my friend Casey Hunt, who has an update for us on Senate races. Casey.
And you know what, Boris? We've got some really interesting comparisons to show you between what we just learned about the governor's races and where we stand here in the Senate. And let's start in Georgia, where Raphael Warnock is leading, 51.9% to Herschel Walker's 46.4%. Just to refresh, the governor's race looks the opposite. Kemp at 50.9, Abrams at 48.6. That really shows you the difference here in terms of performance. We got 43% of the vote in Georgia. We expect it to stay close all evening. Now let's check in on North Carolina, where Sherry Beasley's at 52% to Ted Budd's 46.3%. You just heard that great breakdown from John King about where the votes are still out. There is reason for the Budd campaign to potentially be optimistic here. We're going to be sticking close to this all night. 55% of the vote in there. Now, let's go to Ohio, where Tim Ryan is out to an early lead, 56.9% to J.D. Vance's 43%. But it is still extremely early in Ohio. And, of course, this is a state that has trended very red in recent years. We've got 29% of the vote in Ohio. But now let's go to New Hampshire, where Maggie Hassan is sitting at 60.7% to Don Bolduc's 38.2%. Democrats in New Hampshire telling me they feel very good about where Maggie Hassan is at this hour. But, of course, it's extremely early. Just 14.9% of the vote has been counted in New Hampshire. But now let's check in on Pennsylvania, because we can compare these numbers here to what Boris just told us in the governor's race. John Fetterman at 80.1% to Mehmet Oz's 17.9%. Obviously, the race is going to end much closer than where it stands right now. But Shapiro is sitting at 84.5%. He's the Democratic candidate for governor. That gives you a little bit of an idea of how Fetterman is underperforming Shapiro, which has been the concern for Democrats all the way along, that potential ticket splitters, especially in the Philadelphia collar counties, would pick Mehmet Oz for Senate and Shapiro for governor. Jake.
All right, Casey, thanks so much. Really appreciate that. We've been telling you all night there are about 82 House seats that are competitive, races that are competitive, that we're really keeping an eye on, because it is in those 82 races that the balance of power in the House of Representatives will be won or lost. Let's give you an update right now. Right now, of the 23 competitive seats that are too early to call, the voting has ended, but they're too early to call. Democrats are leading in 15 of them. Republicans are leading in 8 of them. It's early yet. That doesn't necessarily mean Democrats are going to win 15 of them, but that is the state of play as of right now. Let's go over to John King at the Magic Wall to talk more about some of
Keep counting the votes. Can the Democratic senator there, Maggie Hassan, hold on? In Georgia, we'll see.
All right, John King, we are heading into the second busiest hour of the night. Polls are closing in 15 states with a slew of high-profile races in key battlegrounds, including Arizona. And we have a CNN projection for you right now in New York. CNN is projecting that the current Senate Majority Leader, Democrat Charles Schumer, will be reelected, defeating Joe Pinion. In South Dakota, CNN is projecting that a member of Republican leadership, Senator John Thune, will be reelected, defeating Brian Banks. And in Kansas, CNN is projecting that incumbent Republican Senator Jerry Moran will be reelected, defeating Democrat Mark Holland. Let's look at the map right now and talk about the races that we are not yet going to make a projection. They include the Senate races in Arizona, Colorado, Iowa, Louisiana, North Dakota, and Wisconsin. As of right now, we do not have a projection in those races. The balance of power, of course, 100 Senate seats. Democrats have 37 of those seats. Republicans have 38 of those seats. There are 25 seats remaining. Republicans only need to pick up one net seat in order to regain control of the U.S. Senate. There are governor's races going on out there as well. Let's go to Boris Sanchez for that.
Jake, two projections to bring you right now, beginning with a familiar face being elected governor of Arkansas. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the former Donald Trump press secretary / communications director, following in the footsteps of her father, Mike Huckabee, becoming the new governor of Arkansas. We should note she becomes the first woman elected governor of that state, defeating Chris Jones. Another projection to bring you now, this one from Rhode Island. There, incumbent Democrat Dan McKee will win his first full term in the governor's mansion. Remember, he replaced Gina Raimondo when she left the governor's mansion to join the Biden administration as the Commerce Secretary. We have some key race alerts to bring you now, beginning with the state of Texas. Last time we checked in, former Congressman Beto O'Rourke had a decent advantage. Right now, Greg Abbott, the incumbent Republican, has overtaken him, nearly 170,000 vote lead for Abbott, with 33% of the vote in. An update now from the Peach State, Georgia. Brian Kemp building on the lead that we saw him take earlier against Stacey Abrams. Right now, he stands 177,000 votes ahead, roughly 8% advantage for Kemp, still above that 50% threshold to avoid a runoff, with 55% of the vote in Georgia. Meantime, an unexpectedly close race in Oklahoma. A key race alert there. Kevin Stitt, the incumbent Republican, taking on Joy Hoffmeister, a Democrat who actually flipped parties just last year specifically for this race. Stitt right now, 43,000 votes ahead, with 34% of the vote in. Jake.
Boris, thanks so much. Let's the balance of power in the U.S. Senate, 44 Democrats, 40 Republicans, and one of those key states just changed color, John, Georgia.
And it is Georgia. We were talking early, and where we are an hour, 2 hours from now will tell us a lot more about the House than right now.
All right, John, right now CNN is about to make two more projections in House races. In Florida, Republican Maria Elvira Salazar, CNN is projecting, has won a second term in office in her Miami area district. It went narrowly for Trump in 2020. She is a former TV journalist. Congresswoman Maria Elvira Salazar will be reelected, CNN is projecting. In Virginia, Democratic Congresswoman Jennifer Wexton, CNN is projecting, has been elected to a third term in office. She represents the Washington suburbs in Northern Virginia. So that's one win for a Republican, one win for a Democrat. The balance of power right now, 48 Democrats have been elected, 92 Republicans have been elected. That includes 3 pickups. 295 seats are remaining. Remember, you need 218 seats in order to control the House of Representatives. In the U.S. House, of the competitive seats that we're keeping an eye on, Republicans have to win 26 of them, we now say. That is down from 27. So they have made one more gain there that they need to do. Democrats have as well. Democrats need to pick up 52. That is down from 53 in terms of competitive seats. Let's go to Casey Hunt now, who will tell us more about what's going on with the Senate races.
That's right, Jake. Let's check in across the map, and we're going to start in a place we've been all night, and that is Georgia, where Raphael Warnock in the lead right now, 51.2% to Herschel Walker's 47%. But as we've seen, this has been bouncing back and forth, and I expect that you're going to be hearing a lot of us talking about this tonight. Let's check in, though, now on Ohio, where J.D. Vance has taken the lead, 50.3% over Democrat Tim Ryan, the congressman, who now is at 49.7%. Again, Ohio has trended red in recent years. North Carolina, we've got Ted Budd, the Republican, narrowly ahead of Democrat Sherry Beasley, 49.4% to 48.6%. This is a real nail-biter at this hour, though we do have 70% of the vote in. Now let's go north to New Hampshire, where Maggie Hassan is holding her lead in a pretty commanding way at 57.4% to Don Bolduc's 41.3%. He is the Republican. Considering how Chris Sununu has performed as the Republican in the governor's race, pretty significant that Maggie Hassan is right there. Now let's take a look at Pennsylvania, where John Fetterman is sitting at 64.5% to Mehmet Oz's 33.1%. Obviously, we expect this race to end up much closer than what you're seeing on your screen right now. We only have about 15% of the vote in Pennsylvania. And let's check in on Colorado, where Michael Bennet is out to an early lead, 58.2% over Joe O'Dea, the Republican, 39.6%. This is not a seat that Democrats wanted to have to worry about, but that came online near the end of this midterm season as the national environment shifted for Republicans. We've got about a third of the vote in Colorado. We're going to be keeping an eye on that through the evening as well. Now we've got some key race alerts on the governor's races.
Yeah, but a handful of key race alerts beginning in the state of Texas. There, the incumbent Republican Greg Abbott maintaining a lead over former Congressman, former Senate and White House hopeful Beto O'Rourke. Right now, Abbott leading by 80,000 votes with 51% of the vote in Texas as he seeks a third term. Let's get an update now from the Peach State in Georgia. There, incumbent Republican Brian Kemp maintaining a slight advantage over Stacey Abrams, though the 90,000 vote difference between the two is a bigger margin than when Kemp won by 4 years ago. Keep that in mind. 64% of the vote in. He maintains an advantage over that 50% threshold. In Pennsylvania, Attorney General Josh Shapiro, 324,000 votes ahead of Doug Mastriano, 15% of the vote there in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Let's get an update now, a key race alert from the state of Michigan. Incumbent Democrat Gretchen Whitmer currently leading conservative commentator Tudor Dixon, an election denier as well, 11% of the vote in. We just got an update. It appears Whitmer is 37-ish thousand votes ahead as we get an update from Michigan. Let's take a look at a race that nobody expected would be as close as it was at the end. Incumbent Democrat Kathy Hochul running for her full first term in office. She currently leads considerably over Congressman from Long Island and election denier Lee Zeldin, 265,000 votes as we just got the update from the Empire State, a 9% of the vote in right now in the state of New York. We'll send it back to you, Jake.
All right, Boris, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
All the more important because of threats to democracy and the Supreme Court sending abortion rights back to the states.
All right, John King, thanks so much. And CNN has some more projections. Right now, CNN is projecting that incumbent Senator John Bozeman from Arkansas will be reelected. He defeats Natalie James. In Vermont, CNN projects that Congressman Peter Welch will get the promotion and become the next senator from the state of Vermont in an open seat, defeating Gerald Malloy. Let's take a look at the overall balance of power in the 100-seat U.S. Senate. Democrats currently control 38 seats. Republicans currently control 39 seats. 23 seats are remaining. We also have a key race alert that we're going to go to Casey Hunt right now. Casey?
That's right, Jake. We're going to take a quick spin through all of these races for you. We got a whole bunch of vote in. We got Raphael Warnock sitting at 51% right now in Georgia to Herschel Walker's 47.2. He is, of course, right now above that critical threshold to avoid a runoff. We're going to be keeping close tabs. We've seen this move back and forth here in the last hour or so. 65% of the vote in there. Now let's check in on Ohio, where J.D. Vance still in the lead, but it's close. 50.3% to Tim Ryan, the Democratic congressman, 49.7%. John King is going to need to walk us through where the votes are still out to let us know if it's actually going to end up being that close. It's about 45% of the vote in there. Now in North Carolina, look at this. Ted Budd sitting at 50% to Sherry Beasley's 48%. This is actually a little bit of a wider lead than we've seen at some points on this race tonight. We've got 72% of the vote in North Carolina. All right, let's move now to New Hampshire, where we've got Maggie Hassan sitting at 57.8%, Don Bolduc sitting at 40.9%. Smart Republicans and Democrats that I'm talking to who are looking at these numbers say Hassan is in a very strong position at this hour. But, of course, we only have 30% of the vote in, so we'll keep an eye on that one. Now let's go out to Colorado. This, again, a reach for Republicans. Michael Bennet at 58.6% to Joe O'Dea, the Republicans, 39.2% at this hour. But, of course, we do need to know where the votes are coming in because we're only looking at 40% of them so far. Now let's check in on Wisconsin, expected to be one of the tightest races on the map tonight. So take these numbers with a grain of salt. Mandela Barnes in the early vote out to 70% ahead of Ron Johnson, the incumbent Republican, who sits at 29.8% right now. I'm sure John King can explain to us why it looks that way. There's about 4% of the vote in right now in Wisconsin. Now I want to check in on Iowa, another unexpected place on the map, but there was an Iowa poll late in the cycle from a very trustworthy pollster out there that showed Chuck Grassley, the incumbent Republican, in a tight race with Democrat Michael Franken. And some early returns show Franken out ahead 58.3% to Chuck Grassley's 41.6%. But there is very little vote in Iowa at this hour. We only have 11% in. Let's also dip in on Pennsylvania, where John Fetterman, the Democrats, at 60.5%. These numbers are moving in real time. To Dr. Mehmet Oz's 37%. This is another situation where they're going to count votes very slowly. This is one where there's already litigation challenges, questions about how these votes are going to be counted, and we expect that's going to go late into the night. 17% of the vote in Pennsylvania. Now, Boris has got some governor's races to talk to us about, some of which are in some of these same states.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how voters may have split tickets in these races, Casey. First, let's start in the state of Texas. There we have an update. Incumbent Republican Greg Abbott building on the earlier lead he had on Beto O'Rourke, the former congressman, 149,000 votes ahead for the two-time governor of Texas, 52% of the vote in there. Let's take a look at the state of Georgia. Brian Kemp right now with 111,000 vote advantage over Stacey Abrams, 66% of the vote in. Notably, he is above that 50% threshold, meaning he could potentially avoid a runoff if this holds. And we just got an update there. Now 115,000 vote lead for Kemp. Let's take a look at the state of Michigan. Incumbent Democrat Gretchen Whitmer locked in this tough re-election battle with conservative commentator, former TV host Tudor Dixon. A 42,000 vote advantage for Whitmer, roughly an 8% lead right now, still very early with only 12% of the vote in. Let's get an update for you from Pennsylvania. There, the Attorney General Josh Shapiro, he has nearly a 300,000 vote advantage over Doug Mastriano, one of the most extreme candidates you are going to see on the board tonight. 17% of the vote in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, one that our Jake Tapper knows very well. Jake.
All right, Boris, thanks so much. Let's take a look.
Now, Jake, with some time to go, but you still have to say advantage Republican when it comes to capturing the net 5 to take the House.
All right, John King, thanks so much. And we have some projections for you right now. CNN has 3 projections. One of them is a pretty significant one. CNN is projecting that incumbent Democratic Senator Michael Bennet will be reelected, defeating Joe O'Dea. Republicans had a lot of hopes that Joe O'Dea was going to be able to pick off Bennet in purple Colorado. They fell short, which indicates that this is not necessarily going to be the kind of night, the kind of great night Republicans were expecting. 2 other projections in Maryland. The Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen will be reelected, CNN projects, defeating Chris Chafee, a Republican. And in North Dakota, CNN is projecting that former governor and current Senator John Hoeven will be reelected, defeating Democrat Katrina Christensen. The balance of power in the U.S. Senate, as you know, 100 Senate seats. Democrats currently have 40. Republicans currently have 40. There are 20 seats remaining. That's what we're going to be doing for the rest of the night and perhaps a few more days after that. Republicans, of course, remember, need to pick up 1 net Democratic seat in order to regain control of the U.S. Senate. We have governor's races, of course, now as well, and Boris Sanchez has some projections there.
Jake, a trio of projections and 3 victories for Democrats, beginning with history being made in Maryland. Wes Moore, who had never been elected to public office in his life, will become the first black governor of the state of Maryland as he defeats election denier Dan Cox. Another historic win in Massachusetts for Democrats, Maura Healey. In another pickup for Democrats, she becomes the first woman elected governor of Massachusetts and the first openly lesbian governor in the history of the United States as she defeats election denier Jeff Deal. Meantime, the first openly gay governor in U.S. history will win re-election in Colorado. Jared Polis defeats Heidi Ganahl, a Republican entrepreneur. We also have some key race alerts to bring you right now, beginning with the state of Georgia. We've not stopped talking about Georgia all night. We will continue talking about these races. Brian Kemp right now, 204,000 votes ahead of Stacey Abrams, roughly a 7 percentage point advantage with 72% of the vote in the Peach State. Let's get a look at Texas now. There, incumbent Republican Greg Abbott with a similar lead, 282,000 votes ahead of former Congressman Beto O'Rourke, 56% of the vote in the state of Texas. An update now from Michigan. This tough re-election battle for incumbent Democrat Gretchen Whitmer. She stands roughly in the same place where she was when we last checked in on Michigan, a 40,000 vote advantage against former TV host and conservative commentator Tudor Dixon, only 13% of the vote in Michigan. Let's take a look at a true toss-up. Joe Biden won the state of Wisconsin in 2020 by an eyelash, only about 20,000 votes. Tony Evers, the incumbent Democrat right now, holding on to a 76,000 vote advantage over Tim Michels with 21% of the vote in Wisconsin. We want to send it over to Dana Bash now, who has some analysis for us. Dana.
Thanks so much, Boris. And that.
Okay, thanks so much. Voting is about to end in 3 more states, including Nevada, another key battleground that could tip the scale in the fight for the control of the U.S. Senate. We have a key race alert for you now. It is too early to call the U.S. Senate race in Nevada between Senator Cortez Masto and Mr. Laxalt, Adam Laxalt. It is too early to call. We do not have any information for you there to project. In terms of Utah, between incumbent Republican Senator Mike Lee and his challenger, independent Evan McMullin, also too early to call. The balance of power in the U.S. Senate, as we've been telling you all night, this is key. There are 40 Democratic senators, 40 Republican senators, 20 seats outstanding. That is what we are going to be spending the rest of the night focusing on. Republicans need to pick up 1 net seat in order to regain control of the U.S. Senate. But right now, it's tied 40-40. Boris Sanchez now has a projection at the governor's desk. Boris.
Yeah, Jake, a trio of projections to bring you. In all of them, Republican incumbents hanging on, including in the state of South Dakota, where Democrats have not elected a governor since the 1970s. There, Kristi Noem earns another 4 years, defeating Jamie Smith. She is someone that potentially has presidential, if not vice presidential, aspirations for 2024. An update now, a projection from the state of Oklahoma. There, Kevin Stitt getting a big boost from national Republicans late in the game, a big influx of cash there. He defeats Democratic challenger Joy Hoffmeister to earn a return trip to the governor's mansion in Oklahoma. An update now from the state of Vermont. In a state that Joe Biden won by a considerable margin, Republican Governor Phil Scott earns another 4 years. He is the only Republican holding on to statewide office in that state as he defeats progressive educator Brenda Siegel. A number of key race alerts to bring you now. Beginning in the state of Texas, Republican incumbent Greg Abbott building on his lead. He's now 368,000 votes ahead of Beto O'Rourke with 58% of the vote in the Lone Star State. Let's get a look at Michigan right now. Gretchen Whitmer, roughly the same place, maybe a slimmer advantage than the last time we checked in on her contest with Tudor Dixon. 36,000 votes ahead for the Democratic incumbent with 16% of the vote in. An update now, again from Georgia. Brian Kemp there, 247,000 votes ahead of Stacey Abrams. Notable in this rematch, last time around, Kemp only won by about 50,000 votes. This is a much bigger lead, and as you just saw, he added another 1,000 votes to that advantage with 77% of the vote in Georgia. We finish with Wisconsin. The key race alert there, 85,000 votes separating these two candidates. Tony Evers, the incumbent, holding on to an advantage over election denier Tim Michels, 35% of the vote in Wisconsin. As we turn it over to Casey Hunt, we have to point out there's also a big Senate race in Wisconsin as well.
There sure is, Boris. We're going to walk across the map here. I want to start, take a guess, Georgia, which is where we've been talking about all night. Raphael Warnock back in the lead by 0.1%. Look at that, 2,300 or so votes separating Warnock from Herschel Walker at this hour. We've got 77% of the vote in, but I think it's very obvious to everybody watching this could go either way. Let's take a look at Wisconsin. We obviously just saw what Boris was pointing out. It's similar on the Senate side. Mandela Barnes, the Democrat, sitting at 51.8%, but that is not as strong as the gubernatorial candidate, Ron Johnson, the incumbent Republican, at 48%. We expect this to be one of the closest Senate contests throughout the night. We've only got 34% of the vote in, so keep watching that one. Pennsylvania, let's check back in. This has changed pretty dramatically since the last time we really looked at it. John Fetterman is now at 52.1% to Mehmet Oz's 45.4%. This is starting to look a lot more like we expect it to look as they count the votes, perhaps over the next couple of days, depending on how close it remains. Right now, about 146,000 votes separating them. Fetterman has been underperforming the Democratic candidate in the governor's race, Josh Shapiro, so another thing to keep an eye on. Let's check in on Ohio, where J.D. Vance has expanded his lead a little bit over Democrat Tim Ryan, the congressman who's challenging him. This is, of course, retiring Republican Rob Portman's seat, so if Vance can hang on to this lead, it'll represent a Republican hold, 53.4% to Ryan's 46.6%. We still do, of course, have about 30% of the vote outstanding there. Now let's go down to North Carolina, where Ted Budd is still leading Democrat Sherry Beasley 50.8% to Sherry Beasley's 47.1%. Retiring Republican Richard Burr has this seat right now, so this would represent a Republican hold. This has been pretty steady for the past couple of hours, but the vote count creeping upward. We're now at 83% in North Carolina. And let's check back in New Hampshire. This is one that a lot of people were looking to for signs of potentially an early Republican wave if Don Bolduc, the Republican, had a particularly strong showing. So far, that's just not happening. Maggie Hassan is at 57.2%, Bolduc down at 41.5%. Now, granted, we still only have about 40% of the vote in there, so things could still change. But I will say Democrats are saying good things about New Hampshire right now on the Senate side, Jake.
Well, it's a nice state. Of course they're saying nice things. Let's take a look at the balance of power right now in the competitive seats. Remember, we're looking at 82 competitive House seats. We're not going to look at all 435. There are 82 competitive ones. Of those 82, there are 51 competitive seats that we think are too early to call. Right now, in those 51, Democrats are leading in 39 of them. Republicans are leading in 12 of them. It's early. We do not know that this is going to be determinative. But this is certainly, if you're a Democrat watching at home, better news than what a lot of Republicans were hoping for at this point in the night. Let's go over to the magic wall right now. John.
Right over to Boris for a projection.
Yeah, Dana, another major projection just minutes after the last one in the state of Pennsylvania. Josh Shapiro, the Attorney General, will become the new governor of that state. Shapiro had a big lead in fundraising, a big lead in polls throughout. He continued to tie Doug Mastriano to Donald Trump, and it appears to have paid off. He takes over the open seat left behind by term-limited Governor Tom Wolf. Dana?
Thanks so much, Boris. So Josh Shapiro becoming the next governor of Pennsylvania, and sort of a pattern that we've just seen in the last 10 minutes of Republicans who are election deniers losing. Both
on the map at this moment.
All right, John. And CNN has some projections for you right now in the U.S. House. 1 Democrat, 3 Republicans. CNN is projecting the Democratic Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger is the winner in Virginia's 7th congressional district. She's a former CIA case officer. She's criticized her party for moving too far to the left. This was a seat that Republicans hoped to pick up. They failed to do so, CNN projects. Republican State Senator Jen Kiggans has, however, flipped a Southern Virginia district. She defeated incumbent Congresswoman Elaine Luria, who serves on the January 6th committee. That is one of the Republican pickups they were hoping for this evening. Republican and emergency room Dr. Rich McCormick has, CNN projects, flipped the Georgia seat that was gerrymandered to become more Republican. He's a Marine veteran who served in Afghanistan. In addition, in New York, Republican Nicole Maliotakis has been reelected in New York's 11th congressional district, which includes Staten Island and part of Brooklyn. It was a rematch of her 2020 win over Democrat Max Rose. Let's look at the balance of power right now in the U.S. House of Representatives. 81 Democrats in the House, 145 Republicans, including 5 pickups. There are 209 seats remaining to be called. You need 218 to control the U.S. House of Representatives. The state of play right now when it comes to those competitive seats, we've been telling you about these 82 competitive House seats all night. Democrats, well, let's start with Republicans. Republicans need to win 23 of the outstanding competitive seats. Democrats need to win 51 of the outstanding competitive seats. Anderson Cooper, I'm going to go to you right now with your panel. This is a suspenseful night. What's great about election nights is that at the end of the day, the polling and the prognostication and the pundits, at the end of the day, it's up to the voters. And the voters get their say, and sometimes they throw us a lot of surprises like tonight.
And that is what makes it exciting and what makes it a very long night, which is why we are going to be here for quite some time. I want to talk with the team here in New York about what's going on in Virginia.
The next one. The fact that Donald Trump took that away from Republicans in 2020.
No, I know. It's an excellent point. We now have some news from Boris at the projection desk for governors.
That's right, Jake. A handful of projections to bring you, and in all of them, Republican victories beginning in Texas. Greg Abbott, the incumbent Republican, winning a 3rd term, defeating former Congressman Beto O'Rourke. Meantime, in the state of Iowa, another incumbent Republican defeating the Democratic challenger Kim Reynolds there, winning re-election against small business owner Deidre DeGier. We also have a projection to bring you from the state of Nebraska. Jim Pillen, a veterinarian who defeated a Donald Trump-backed candidate in the Republican primary. He becomes the next governor of Nebraska, defeating state legislator Carol Blood. And no surprises in the state of Wyoming, a state that Donald Trump carried with some 70 percentage points in 2020. Mark Gordon, the incumbent Republican there, defeats Teresa Livingston, an Air Force veteran. Let's get you some key race alerts now. And in 4 of these key races, the Democrat is leading an election denier. First, in Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, the incumbent Democrat, she builds on the lead that she had when we last checked in on this race against Tudor Dixon, now sitting 112,000 votes ahead with 30% of the vote in the state of Michigan. An update now, Jake, from your home state, home Commonwealth maybe? Josh Shapiro, the Attorney General there, 430,000 votes ahead of Doug Mastriano with 62% of the vote in. Meantime, our first look at the Arizona governor's race with this key race alert. Katie Hobbs, the Secretary of State that helped certify the 2020 election results in Arizona, she's leading former TV anchor turned unrepentant election denier Kari Lake, 184,000 votes, half of the vote in the state of Arizona. Then in New York, a race that nobody expected would be as close as it was in polling right at the very end. Kathy Hochul, the incumbent Democrat, 647,000 votes in front of Lee Zeldin, who you may recall voted to object to certifying the election results in 2020 in the states of Arizona and Pennsylvania. Hochul holding on to a lead there. Let's get you a look at Georgia now, this race that we've been talking about all night. Incumbent Republican Brian Kemp nearly 300,000 votes ahead of Stacey Abrams in this rematch from 2018. 82% of the vote in Georgia. Let's turn it over to Casey Hunt now. Casey, you have an update for us on some Senate races.
We do, and we're going to start. Can you fill in the blank for me, Boris? Georgia. We're going to start in Georgia, where Herschel Walker, again, I want to compare this directly to the number Boris just gave you, which was 54% for Kemp. Herschel Walker sitting at 49.6. That is considerably behind, but he is ahead of Raphael Warnock, the Democrat, who holds 48.5% right now. Again, this is so close. Neither one has 50%. We are potentially looking at a runoff, 83% of the vote in Georgia. So let's check in on Wisconsin, which has been tightening over the past hour or so. Mandela Barnes, the Democrat, look, you saw it tighten right there on your screen. Now at exactly 50%, just 4,000 votes ahead of the incumbent Republican, Ron Johnson, at 49.8%. Our friends at the Magic Wall are going to be able to give us a sense of how we may see this move in the next couple of hours with 50% of the vote in Wisconsin. Let's check in on Jake Tapper's Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, also mine. John Fetterman, 49.8%, now below 50%. Mehmet Oz, 47.7%. This race really tightening up as we have been expecting all night. About 75,000 votes separate them right now. I think we can expect a really long time count in this race. 64% of the vote in Pennsylvania right now. And I do want to check in on Arizona because this has been a critical battleground as well. Mark Kelly, the incumbent Democrat, sitting at 58.1%. So he's got a comfortable early lead over Blake Masters, the Republican, at 39.6%. I do want to point out Katie Hobbs is sitting at 57% in the governor's race. So Kelly is slightly outperforming Hobbs. Potential to see a split on that race. There, of course, is only 50% of the vote in here, so we could see this tighten up throughout the night, Jake.
All right, Casey, thanks so much. Coming up, we're going to go live to Georgia as we follow that incredibly close Senate race and whether it may be heading for a runoff. And we're coming up on the first results from the West Coast, including the powerhouse state of California. Back in a moment.
In pretty good shape. Let's keep counting.
All right, John King, thanks so much. And right now, polls are about to close in the political powerhouse of California, as well as 3 other states out west. And we have some projections for you now. 2 for Democrats, 1 for a Republican. In California, CNN is projecting that Senator Alex Padilla, who was appointed to that seat after Kamala Harris became the vice president, that he will be elected senator from California, defeating Mark Mosier. In Illinois, CNN is projecting that incumbent Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth will be reelected, defeating Kathy Salvi. And in Idaho, CNN is projecting that incumbent Republican Senator Mike Crapo will be reelected, defeating David Roth. States that are too early to call at this hour. In Washington state, incumbent Democratic Senator Patty Murray is running against a strong challenge from Tiffany Smiley, the Republican. That race right now, CNN deems it too early to call. In Oregon, Senator Ron Wyden running for re-election. That race as well, too early to call. Let's look at the balance of power. As you know, there are 100 seats in the U.S. Senate. Democrats currently have 42 of them. Republicans currently have 44 of them. The fight over these 14 remaining seats is what we're going to be covering for the next few hours. Republicans need to pick up one net Democratic seat in order to wrest control of the U.S. Senate. We have some governor's races to report for you now. Let's go to Boris Sanchez.
Jake, a handful of projections to make. In all of them, the incumbent keeping the governor's mansion. We begin in California with Governor Gavin Newsom. Remember, he survived a recall election last year. There are whispers that he may be considering a presidential run in 2024. He easily defeats election questioner Brian Dahle to win re-election in California. In the most expensive governor's race in the country, but perhaps one of the least competitive, incumbent Democrat billionaire J.B. Pritzker, who largely self-funded his own campaign, he defeats election denier Darren Bailey to win re-election in Illinois. Let's get a look at Maine now. There, the incumbent Democrat Janet Mills had a close race this summer with former two-time Governor Paul LePage, but LePage fumbled a question about abortion rights during a debate, and Mills never looked back, maintaining an advantage in polling. Tonight, she wins another 4 years in Maine. This time, in Idaho, the Republican incumbent Brad Little, he will win re-election in a state that Donald Trump carried by some 60 percentage points in 2020. He defeats educator Stephen Haidt to win re-election in Idaho. Some key race alerts now to bring you, beginning in a true toss-up state in Wisconsin. Remember, Joe Biden won here by a very slim margin in 2020. Right now, Tony Evers leads by 62,000 votes ahead of election questioner Tim Michaels, 62% of the vote in the state of Wisconsin. We have an update for you now from Michigan. Gretchen Whitmer growing her lead against Tudor Dixon, the conservative commentator, 98,000 votes ahead, roughly 7 percentage point advantage for Whitmer, 33% of the vote in Michigan. And what would a key race alert slew be without the state of Georgia? Brian Kemp, the Republican incumbent, 305,000 votes ahead right now of Stacey Abrams, about 9 percentage points with 86% of the vote in the state of Georgia. As we hand it over to Casey Hunt with an update on the senators' races, I would be surprised if you didn't update us on Georgia.
Your update would be useless if you didn't have Georgia in there. And of course, we are starting with Georgia yet again, because look at these vote totals. 32,000 votes separate Herschel Walker from Raphael Warnock right now. It's actually a little bit bigger than it has been at some points throughout the night. Well, look at that, 49.4 to 48.5%. Again, nobody's over 50, heading to a potential runoff, 86% of the vote in. We could see this change back and forth still all night long as these votes get counted, folks. All right, let's move to Wisconsin, where Ron Johnson, the Republican, is sitting at 50.4% to Mandela Barnes' 49.4%. There's about 16,000 votes separating them. And we actually can compare this. What Boris just gave us in the governor's race showed Evers, the Democrat, ahead at 51.2%, about 62,000 votes separating him from the Republican, who is sitting at 47.4%. So you can see this is becoming another one of these examples where we are seeing a difference in terms of people potentially splitting their tickets here. Now let's check in on Pennsylvania, where John Fetterman, man, that's close, 49.5 to 48% over Dr. Mehmet Oz here. So again, the question that I have when I look at this, and Jake, of course, as we know, is from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, but John King and David Chalian are going to know what kind of vote is still out, what we're looking at in terms of, is it Philadelphia? That could give the Fetterman campaign some hope. Still a long way to go there, 30% of the vote's still out. North Carolina, let's just check in quickly. Ted Budd here, the Republican, sitting at 50.8%. Sherry Beasley, the Democrat, at 46.9%. There's about 143,000 votes separating them at this hour. So perhaps a pretty comfortable place to be when you're looking at 91% of the vote in. Reminder, this is currently a Republican seat. Republican Richard Burr is retiring, Jake.
All right, Casey, thanks so much. And just a reminder, we're looking at 82 competitive House seats. That's really what we're looking at in order to determine whether or not Republicans are going to be able to wrest control of the House of Representatives. Of the 23 competitive seats that Republicans need to win in order to take control, they are currently leading in 17 of them, 17 out of 23. So that's pretty good. Let's take a look at the Democrats now. Democrats have a taller order on their hands. They need to win 50 of the 82 competitive seats. Right now, they're leading in 35 of them. So neither party is where they need to be. Republicans have a slightly easier job to do in terms of what they need to do.
Let's go over to Jake for a projection.
That's right, Dana. We have a major projection right now. CNN is projecting that in Ohio, venture capitalist J.D. Vance will defeat Congressman Tim Ryan and be the next U.S. Senator from the state of Ohio. J.D. Vance will be elected the next senator from Ohio, taking the place of retiring Republican Senator Rob Portman. The balance of power right now, 100 seats in the Senate, 43 of them belong to Democrats, 45 of them belong to Republicans, 12 seats remain. All Republicans need to do is pick up one net Democratic seat, and they will be able to wrest control of the U.S. Senate. Let's go to Melanie Zanona right now.
On Georgia and then Nevada. Right now, if you're the Democrats, Jake, you're watching Nevada vote count, and you're nervous.
Indeed. And CNN now has two major projections. In North Carolina, CNN projects that Congressman Ted Budd will become the next U.S. Senator, defeating former North Carolina Supreme Court Justice Sherry Beasley. Ted Budd, endorsed by Donald Trump in this primary, and then Donald Trump rallied for him throughout North Carolina. He will become the next U.S. Senator from North Carolina. In Connecticut, this one's no surprise, incumbent Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal will be reelected, defeating Republican Leora Levy. Let's take a look at the balance of power at this hour. As you know, 100 Senate votes. Democrats have 44 of them. Republicans have 46 of them. There are 10 seats remaining. 10 seats remaining. And CNN reminds you, of course, that Republicans just need to pick up one net Republican seat and one net Democratic seat in order to take control of the U.S. Senate. So that's where we are, 44 to 46. And Casey Hunt has some announcements for us at the Senate desk.
We do, Jake, and this really shows you, to John King's point, that we are getting down to the brass tacks here in the Senate as we try to figure out which way it's going to go, perhaps by one seat. And let's start, as always, in Georgia, where Herschel Walker has a very narrow lead over Raphael Warnock, just 15,000 votes, which is such a small amount considering the millions that have been cast. We've got 88% of the vote in there. Election officials saying we might not know tonight. Pennsylvania, John Fetterman at 49.2%, Mehmet Oz at 48.3%, 37,000 votes separating them, again, among millions cast. And this race is one that we're going to be counting potentially for days here. And as John outlined, this is what will save Democrats if they lose that race out in Nevada, which Republicans are very confident about, and give them a shot to actually retain control. 75% of the vote in Pennsylvania at this hour. Now let's check in on Wisconsin, which remains very close, 51% for the incumbent Ron Johnson over the Democrat Mandela Barnes at 48.8%. This remains very, very close. Mandela Barnes has been underperforming the Democratic Governor Evers so far tonight. Only about we're at 69% of the vote, so we've only got about 30% out of the vote outstanding. Now let's check in on Arizona, where Mark Kelly is sitting pretty comfortably right now, 58% over Blake Masters, the Republican, at 39.7%. That's a 240 or so thousand vote gap. I want to check in with John King and David Chalian to figure out what kind of votes are outstanding, because there's only about 50% of the vote in Arizona, and we could see that tighten up. But now we're going to turn to Boris, who's got some critical updates on the governor's race.
Yeah, Casey, it's really interesting, as you pointed out, the lead for the Republican in the Senate race in Wisconsin. As we get you a key race alert from that state, the Democratic incumbent in the governor's race is currently leading. Right now, Tony Evers, 43,000 votes ahead of election questioner Tim Michaels. It just changed. Now it's a 45,000 vote advantage with 69% of the vote in Wisconsin. We want to update you on the state of Michigan right now. Gretchen Whitmer, nearly 90,000 votes ahead of conservative commentator Tudor Dixon. It just changed again. Now it's 88,000 votes. The lead slightly thinning there for Gretchen Whitmer with 39% of the vote in Michigan. In Kansas, perhaps the most vulnerable Democratic incumbent running for re-election, Laura Kelly, in a state that Donald Trump won by about 15 percentage points. She currently leads against Derek Schmidt, an election denier. 32,000 vote advantage for Laura Kelly with 83% of the vote in Kansas. Meantime, the most unusual governor's race you're going to see on the map tonight, a three-way race between Tina Kotek, a Democrat, Christine Drazan, a Republican, and former Democrat turned independent Betsy Johnson, right now the Democrat in this race, with an 18,600 vote advantage, 53% of the vote in there. We send it back over to Jake Tapper. Jake.
Thank you so much, Boris. And I just want to remind everybody, of the competitive seats. There are 82 competitive seats. Republicans have to win 23 of them, and they are leading in 22 of them. So that's for control of the U.S. House. Republicans on their way. Of the 23 competitive seats they have to win, they're currently leading in 22. What about Democrats? What do Democrats have to do? They have to win 49 of the 82 competitive seats, 49 of them. And right now, they are leading in 42 of them. Not bad, but not as close as where the Republicans are. And I want you to take a look at some of these margins right now when it comes to these House races. In Oregon, Alex Skarlatos is ahead by 0.08%. In Iowa, Zach Nunn up by 0.18%. In California, Congresswoman Michelle Steele up by 0.4%. In New York, Molinaro up 0.67%. In Arizona, Eli Crane up 1.38%. Democrats, too, their leads are pretty narrow as well. We're looking at Kermit Jones up by 0.06% in California, and Tony Vargas up by 0.15% in Nebraska. Congressman Ryan is up by 0.36% in New York. Tom Malinowski in New Jersey up by only 0.88%. And then Connecticut, Jahana Hayes up by 1.72%. These are competitive seats, and the margins of victory right now are so narrow, so narrow. We haven't called.
Looking at this map right now, Jake, and it is incredibly competitive. The Democrats fighting tenaciously, at least to limit that.
That's right, John, and we have some more projections for you for the U.S. Senate. CNN projects in Washington State, incumbent Democratic Senator Patty Murray will hold on to her seat, defeating a challenge from Republican Tiffany Smiley. Senator Patty Murray, reelected, CNN projects. And then just south of Washington, in Oregon, CNN projects that incumbent Democratic Senator Ron Wyden will defeat a challenge from Joe Ray Perkins. So that's 2 Democratic seats held on. Where does that leave us in the balance of power? Obviously, 100 seats. Right now, we have Democrats with 46 of them, Republicans with 46 of them, 8 seats remaining. Remember, Republicans just need to pick up 1 net Democratic seat in order to wrest control of the U.S. Senate. Right now, it's 46-46. And John King, big picture. Let's look at the U.S. Senate here. We have 48 Democrats leading.
Win because they knew that would be a sign that there was not going to be a wave. This had a potential for being a positive night for them. They won. And right now they feel pretty good about things, Jake.
Yeah, or at least not a negative night for them, not the kind they were fearing. We have projections for you now, and 5 of them are for Democrats winning, and 1 is for a Republican winning. In Tennessee, Republican Andy Ogles, a former mayor and conservative think tank executive, has flipped a seat in Tennessee. It is a Nashville area district that got much more Republican after redistricting. Democrat Greg Landsman has flipped a seat in Ohio. This is a surprise and a big win for Democrats. He beat longtime incumbent Republican Steve Chabot. This congressional district includes Cincinnati and became a lot bluer after redistricting. Democrat Marcy Kaptur in Ohio, one of the longest-serving members of the House, has been reelected in Ohio. She defeated a far-right Trump supporter who was at or near the Capitol on January 6th. That's after her district was made more Republican. She won anyway. Ohio State legislator Amelia Sykes has won an open seat for Democrats in northern Ohio. It's a swing district that Biden won by 3. Kansas Democrat Sharice Davids has won a 3rd term. She's one of the first 2 Native American women to serve in Congress. That is a tough congressional district. It's a battleground district. She has been reelected. Rhode Island State Treasurer Seth Magaziner has held on to an open seat for Democrats. It's a district Biden won by 14. Republicans thought they could pick it off in a wave year. Apparently, it's not the year they thought they were going to have. Let's look at the balance of power right now in the House of Representatives. Democrats have 155 House seats, including 1 pickup. Republicans have 184 House seats, including 6 pickups. 96 seats remain. The magic number 218. In terms of the state of play, looking at the competitive seats we told you at the beginning of the night, we were keeping an eye on and watching pretty much to determine who was going to be able to control the House of Representatives. Republicans have to win 22 competitive seats. Democrats have to win 44 competitive seats. And right now, we're taking a look at those competitive seats and counting the votes and trying to figure out who is actually going to win. It still seems as though Republicans are on to a possible path to taking control of the House of Representatives. But this is not the night, as you can tell by the crickets chirping behind Manu Raju at the Republican headquarters. This is not the night they thought they were going to have.
No, and what an odd moment, a crossroads moment we're at in this night, in the sense that Joe Biden could well beat the national historical averages here in both the House and the Senate, and yet he could still lose both the House and the Senate.
Right.
In that going back to the Reagan days, the average of the House, the first midterm, is 31 seats, right? On the map right now, they may get there, but I don't see 31 seats on the map right now for Republicans.
Tough,
I see them getting a majority right now. It's not done, but I can see that. I'll show it to you in a second. And then the national average since Reagan in your first midterm election in the Senate is -2. Joe Biden, of course, can't lose any. And the Senate, I don't think we're going to know the answer tonight. I'm getting ahead of our people out there, but I don't think we're going to know the answer tonight. But we'll see as we go. So this is the full.
CNN This Morning, tomorrow at 6 Eastern.
Welcome back to Election Night in America. We have some CNN projections for you for some House races. In Texas, the 34th Congressional District, Congressman Vicente Gonzalez defeats Mayra Flores. Vicente Gonzalez is the winner in that race in Texas. In Illinois' 13th Congressional District, Democrat Nikki Budzinski has flipped an open seat that was gerrymandered to become more blue. She's a former Biden administration official. She will defeat Regan Deering. And then in New Jersey's 7th Congressional District, Republican Thomas Kean Jr. has defeated incumbent Congressman Tom Malinowski. Malinowski is the incumbent. Kean Jr., the former New Jersey Senate Republican leader, and also son of the former New Jersey governor and chair of the 9/11 Commission, Tom Kean. Let's look at the balance of power right now. 218 seats are needed to control the House of Representatives, 165 seats. The Democrats have 165, including 2 pickups. Republicans have 190 seats, including 7 pickups, 80 seats remaining right now. The state of play right now when it comes to those competitive seats, those 82 competitive seats we've been looking at the entire night, Republicans need to win 21 of them. Democrats need to win 40 of them. So Republicans have an easier task ahead of them. Let's look at these other 2 races right now that are very interesting as votes are coming in. In Colorado's 3rd Congressional District, Lauren Boebert, the incumbent Republican congresswoman, a firebrand, some would say an extremist, is currently losing. She's 8,551 votes behind her Democratic challenger, Adam Frisch, with 80% of the vote in. That is a surprising result as of now. It is not the end. We're still looking at the votes. They're still counting them. And then in New York, at the 17th Congressional District, Sean Maloney, who is in addition to being an incumbent congressman, he is the chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. He is losing with 85% of the vote in to Michael Lawler, a local state representative. We also have some governor's races for you right now. Boris Sanchez has those.
Jake, we have a pair of projections to bring you, both of them Democratic holds. First, in the state of New Mexico, incumbent Democrat Michelle Lujan Grisham, the only Latina governor in the United States. She defeats former TV weatherman Mark Ronchetti for another 4 years in New Mexico. In the state of Connecticut, another Democratic win. Incumbent Democrat Ned Lamont winning his rematch against Bob Stefanowski. This race decided by 3 percentage points last time around, a much bigger margin this time, securing another 4 years for Ned Lamont. Let's take a look at some key race alerts now. 4 races where Democrats are defeating either election deniers or election questioners, starting with Arizona. Katie Hobbs right now 172,000 votes ahead of Kari Lake, 52% of the vote in Arizona. Let's get an update now from Michigan. Gretchen Whitmer, the incumbent Democrat, 133,000 votes ahead of conservative commentator Tudor Dixon, 62% of the vote in Michigan. As we take a look at Wisconsin, a very close race there. Joe Biden won this state by only about 20,000 votes last time. That's roughly the advantage that incumbent Democrat Tony Evers has right now, about 25,000 votes ahead of Tim Michels, with 83% of the vote in Wisconsin. We also have an update to bring you in the state of Kansas. This race, very, very close. Incumbent Democrat Laura Kelly, perhaps the most vulnerable incumbent Democrat on the entire map, 24,000 votes ahead right now of Derek Schmidt, with 86% of the vote in Kansas. And we have a bonus projection to bring you in a Secretary of State race in Georgia. This guy became a household name after the 2020 election. Brad Raffensperger caught on tape as Donald Trump tried to convince him to find 11,000 votes in the Peach State. Raffensperger refused. Donald Trump made him a target, but he wins re-election as the Secretary of State in Georgia. Let's turn it over to Casey Hunt now. You've got an update for us on Senate races, Casey.
Yes, and we are going to start, as we always have, it seems, this evening in that same state, which is Georgia. Raphael Warnock has actually ticked into the lead here, but man, look how close this is. 12,631 votes right now of literally millions. You can see it on the screen, separating Warnock from Walker. Again, both under 50%. Question remains, can someone get to the point where they avoid a runoff, or are we looking at 4 more weeks of this fight that we have seen? 94% of the vote in Georgia. Let's check in now on Pennsylvania, which is turning out to be our other linchpin. John Fetterman, 49.2%. Mehmet Oz, 48.3%. You heard Jake and John King really breaking down where some of the votes are out. Here, Fetterman seems to be outperforming what Biden did in some of the rural counties, but we're still waiting on those big numbers in counties like Philadelphia. 88% of the vote in, but this really could be where the Senate hinges. Now let's take a look at Wisconsin. Ron Johnson sitting at 51.6%. He is doing better than the Republican gubernatorial candidate, and Mandela Barnes is underperforming the sitting governor, Tony Evers, 51.6% to 48.2%. For this race, still very close, but Johnson right now doing what he needs to do with 83% of the vote in here. Now let's check in on Arizona, where Mark Kelly is sitting at 57.2%. Pretty comfortable lead over Blake Masters, who's got 40.5%. It's tightened a little bit since the last time we took a look at this. We really need to know where we're still waiting on votes to fully understand what this means at this hour of the night. We've got 53% of the vote in Arizona, Jake.
All right, Casey. Wow, lots of votes still out there. And John King and I are going to dive into Georgia, where 6% of the vote is remaining outstanding. Raphael Warnock has taken a slight lead at 49.1%. He's 12,000 votes ahead. So what are we looking for? We're going to tell you right after this quick break.
For a projection.
Yeah, Jake, 2 important projections to bring you, beginning with the race in New York. This race got very close in polling at the end, but in actuality, when the votes were counted, it wasn't very close at all. Incumbent Democrat Kathy Hochul winning her first full term in office. She took over, of course, for disgraced former Governor Andrew Cuomo after he resigned. She defeats Congressman Lee Zeldin to win a first full term in the state of New York. Next, an update for you from the state of Minnesota. Tim Walz, the incumbent Democrat, projected to win re-election there against Scott Jensen, a physician who made some dubious claims about the COVID-19 vaccine. 2 Democratic incumbents holding on to the governor's mansion in those 2 states. As we turn it over to Dana Bash, who has some analysis for us. Dana?
Thank you so much, Boris. Well, on New York.
I just got to go to Boris Sanchez for a projection.
Yeah, Anderson, an important projection to bring you from the state of Wisconsin in that governor's race. This state was decided by only about 20,000 votes in the last presidential election. As it stands right now, Tony Evers, the incumbent Democrat, excuse me, has nearly tripled that total. He stands to win re-election in the state of Wisconsin, defeating Republican Tim Michels. We also have some key race alerts to bring you, beginning with the state of Arizona. There, Secretary of State Katie Hobbs is leading the unrepentant election denier Kari Lake, 164,000 votes, with 54% of the vote in the state of Arizona. Let's take a look at Nevada now. Steve Sisolak, a very vulnerable Democratic incumbent. Right now, he stands 43,000 votes ahead of the sheriff of Clark County, Joe Lombardo, 44% of the vote in the state of Nevada. Let's get another look at Michigan. Gretchen Whitmer has steadily been building this lead every time we've checked in on this race. She now stands 187,000 votes ahead of conservative commentator Tudor Dixon, 71% of the vote in the state of Michigan. We take a look now at the state of Kansas. This is perhaps the reddest state in which a Democrat gubernatorial candidate was running for re-election. Laura Kelly, 22,000 votes ahead of Derek Schmidt, who questioned the results of the 2020 election. 87% of the vote in Kansas. Let's send it over to Jake Tapper and John King at the Magic Wall.
All right, thanks so much, Boris.
Looking at this, here's where you are in the race. 65,000 votes, 66,000 votes ahead if you come up. Jake, let's go back to you.
That's right, John, because CNN has a major projection. CNN projects that Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman will be the next U.S. Senator from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. This is a pickup. Retiring Senator Pat Toomey is a Republican, and the Democrats are now taking that Senate seat back. Again, CNN is projecting that John Fetterman will be the next U.S. Senator from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And look, we're going to watch as the people in Fetterman headquarters get that news in 1 second. In any case, to bring us up to speed in the balance of power, 100 Senate seats. Democrats have 47 of them, including one pickup. Republicans have 46 of them. 7 seats remain. Republicans need to pick up one net Democratic seat. Right now, they're not there, and Democrats just picked up one Republican seat. Dana Bash.
Absolutely huge, huge news, a huge development. As Jake said, a pickup in Pennsylvania, but also a kind of moral victory for Democrats on a national level, because this was where they went. I mean, President Biden basically was there so much. Oh, there you go. Look at how excited the people in Fetterman headquarters are right now as they not only understand that their candidate won against some pretty big odds, but they're enjoying seeing it being projected on CNN.
And you know, one thing I really cannot get out of my head, just going back to earlier in the night when we saw those exits coming out of Pennsylvania, that basically said that voters had made Fetterman's health as an issue a wash. And then on the question of, has Oz lived long enough in the state to represent it effectively, 55% said no. To me, that was, I think, probably the first sign that we had tonight that something was going to be happening in Pennsylvania. Republicans thought this race was over after that debate. They thought that it had disqualified Fetterman, and the voters tonight said something totally different. They were wrong.
I think, Abby, this was a personal judgment. And yes, obviously, John Fetterman had a stroke, and he still shows the effects of it. But voters were saying, we trust this guy, we think that he's there for us, and they just didn't feel that about Mehmet Oz. They thought he, was a guy who came in to try to pick up a seat across a state line, and that he wasn't there for them. I think it was a personal endorsement of their faith in Fetterman, and really kind of a personal rejection of Mehmet Oz.
I should also say, what they're seeing in Fetterman headquarters is a delay of CNN, which is why you're seeing us kind of twice. We are expecting John Fetterman to come out soon. We talked earlier in the night about how...
We can now make a projection in the Senate race in Utah. CNN is projecting that incumbent Republican Senator Mike Lee will be reelected by the good citizens of Utah. He defeats independent candidate Evan McMullen. Let's look at the balance of power in the Senate right now. 100 seats. 47 of them belong to the Democrats, including one pickup in Pennsylvania. 47 of them belong to the Republicans. There are 6 seats remaining. Republicans need to win 2 net Democratic seats in order to win control of the U.S. Senate. We have governor's races for you to talk about now as well. Boris Sanchez has that.
Yeah, Jake, a big projection for CNN. We are projecting that Gretchen Whitmer, the incumbent Democrat in the state of Michigan, will win re-election. She made abortion rights the centerpiece of her campaign. She filed a lawsuit to stop a 1931 abortion ban that took effect after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in the Dobbs decision. She also introduced legislation in that state to expand and protect abortion access. It pays off for her as she defeats Tudor Dixon, a Trump-endorsed election denier, Jake.
All right, Boris Sanchez, thanks so much. And we can now make projections in 3 states that have ballot measures on abortion. CNN projects that Californians have voted yes on establishing a state constitutional right to an abortion. Voters in Michigan have approved a similar ballot measure, saying yes to abortion rights. The trend is holding in Vermont, another yes vote to ensure the right to an abortion. And take a look at Kentucky, a measure that would amend the state constitution to explicitly state that there is no Kentucky constitutional right to an abortion. That is trailing as of right now. Dana Bash.
Through I think voters in the United States are making their voices heard on this issue.
Abby, I'm going to go to Jake for a projection.
Thanks, Dana. That's right. CNN has a projection for you right now. CNN projects that Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii, the Democrat, will be reelected, defeating Republican Bob McDermott. Let's bring the balance of power on that right now, because we've just added a seat to the Democrats. Democrats, there's 100 seats in the U.S. Senate. Democrats have 48 of them, including a pickup in a Republican seat. That's Pennsylvania. Republicans have 47. In order for Republicans to wrest control of the U.S. Senate from the Democrats, they now need to win 2 net Democratic seats. 2 net Democratic seats. Casey Hunt, we go to you now with more on the battle for the Senate.
Well, Jake, we can walk through what the possibilities are for Republicans right now and what they aren't. Let's start in Georgia, where Raphael Warnock is still barely ahead of Herschel Walker, the Republican. So this is one where, again, if this holds, we're looking at 4 more weeks of fighting. This could, of course, go either way under those kinds of circumstances. It could all come down to the race here, depending on what happens on the rest of the map. 96% of the vote in there. And let's look at what else is out. Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, the incumbent, sitting at 50.7. This has been pretty steady here as the vote has continued to roll in, that this margin is about the same. Mandela Barnes at 49.1%. We obviously have called the Wisconsin governor's race for the Democrat, but Ron Johnson is on a different path right now with 80% of the vote in there. Let's check in on Nevada, where, of course, Democrats have been pessimistic, or at least they were at the beginning of the night, but obviously their optimism has increased as results have rolled in through the evening. Catherine Cortez Masto currently at 53.3% to the Republican Adam Laxalt's 44%. We have 53% of the vote in here in Nevada. A lot of questions about whether it's mail or how that's all coming in. We're going to have to go to John King and David Chalian for some of those answers. So let's check in on Arizona, where Mark Kelly sitting comfortably ahead of the Republican Blake Masters at 57.2% to Blake Masters 40.5%. If this kind of lead can hold, Democrats can hold there. We're looking at that trio of races, Nevada and Georgia, perhaps Wisconsin, as this night gets later and later, Jake.
All right, Casey, we're tracking the Senate races that are still undecided, including those nail-biters in Georgia and Wisconsin. The battle for control of the U.S. Senate still too early to call. Our coverage continues after this.
I'm Lucy Kapnov in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and this is CNN.
All right, we are back, everyone. I'm Don Lemon. This is CNN's special live coverage of Election Night in America. Both chambers of Congress up for grabs at this hour. And just in, we have CNN projections in the House. We're going to take you straight away to the 15th district, Texas's 15th district. Look, it's there on your wall. Republicans have picked up a seat. Monica De La Cruz has defeated the Democrat there, in Texas. In Iowa, the 2nd congressional district Republican Ashley Henson has won, defeating Liz Mathis. The Republicans holding on to that seat in Iowa. Ashley Henson winning right now. In Minnesota's 2nd district, Democratic Angie Craig has defeated Republican Tyler Kistner there. This is a hold for Democrats. Democrats hang on to that seat in Minnesota. This is now North Carolina's 13th district that you're looking at. Democrat Wiley Nickel has won over Republican Bo Hines. Wiley Nichols defeats Republican Bo Hines. This is a Democratic pickup there. Take it to Pennsylvania. This is the 8th district. Incumbent Democrat Matt Cartwright has held his seat. And in that state's 17th district, another hole for Democrats there. Chris DeLazio has defeated Republican Jeremy Schaefer, defeated Jeremy Schaefer there. So I want you to take a look at the balance of power now. The balance of power, Republicans getting closer and closer to that magic number of 218, but they're not there yet, and we still have lots of runway to go. And another CNN projection just in. That CNN projection is in Alaska. Alaska will remain a Republican stronghold. This is a seat held by incumbent Lisa Murkowski. We cannot yet declare an exact winner because the state uses ranked choice voting. So that's what's happening in Alaska. That is the balance of power. Now in the House, we're going to continue to check in with the balance of power in the House, also as well the balance of power in the Senate. So I want to get straight now to CNN's Poppy Harlow. Poppy is, talking about what we want to hear from the voters. We've been talking a lot. Hello, everyone. Don Lemon here. This is continuing coverage of CNN's Election Night in America, and we have a CNN projection. So here we go. Democrat Josh Green will be Hawaii's next governor. He is a projected winner. He's going to hold as a Democrat there. That is a hold for Democrats in Hawaii. In the meantime, Democrats managing to outperform in some races for governor all across the country. First up, you can see Michigan there with Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer winning her re-election bid against Trump-endorsed Republican Tudor Dixon. Democrats have flipped 2 gubernatorial seats so far, one in Massachusetts with a historic win by Maura Healey. She will become the nation's first out lesbian governor. Maura Healey, nation's first out lesbian governor in the state of Massachusetts. And in Maryland, let's take it to Maryland now. That's where Wes Moore defeated the far-right Republican Dan Cox to become the first African-American elected governor there. Overall, though, GOP still holding on to some top jobs in the majority of the Senate with a history-making victory of their own in Arkansas. That's where Sarah Huckabee Sanders is projected to be the first woman elected governor. Remember, her father was a governor there as well. So it's an interesting story for her. Republicans also winning a few other big races. Florida's Ron DeSantis, Georgia's Brian Kemp, Greg Abbott in Texas, all defeating their Democratic challengers. The wall all red there except for the surrounding blue framing. So there you go. CNN's John Berman. Walk over to the magic wall. So here we go. Can we talk about Arizona?
Let's talk about Arizona. Katie Hobbs is the Secretary of State there, and Kari Lake is this election-denying Republican who has the support of Donald Trump there. Media-hating.
Former anchor.
Republican, former television anchor. Not that there's anything wrong with being a television anchor, Don. So she's trailing Katie Hobbs, the Secretary of State, by almost 11 points. But one thing I do want to point out there, again, just 56% in. We've been talking about the Arizona Senate race. She's outperforming the Senate candidate, Blake Masters, who was 41.4%. Let me just put that up again. She's at 44.7. She's running about 3 points better. She's about 3 points better, and that could be the difference.
I'm Jeff Zeleny in Marietta, Georgia, and this is CNN.
And there you see it. There's a CNN projection, and it is in Michigan's 7th. Alyssa Slotkin, a Democrat there, has won re-election in Michigan's 7th congressional over Tom Barrett. This was a tight race. Republicans had hoped to pick up. They did not. The Democrats will hang on there. And you may also remember Republican Liz Cheney campaigned for Alyssa Slotkin in Michigan, and Alyssa Slotkin is the projected winner there. And Oregon's 4th District Democrat Val Hoyle wins another hold for Democrats there, another hold for Democrats in Oregon. Now let's take you now to the balance of power. See where the balance of power is happening now in the House of Representatives. Republicans remain in the lead, but it is tight. They remain in the lead with 195. 218 obviously is the one that's needed. That's the magic number. Democrats 176. They picked up 3. Republicans 8 pickups so far. So let's head out now to CNN Sunland Safadi and Capitol Hill. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi weighing in on the performance of Democrats tonight. What is she saying? Good morning.
That's right, Don. Certainly. Good morning to you. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi out with a new statement just in the last hour, acknowledging in essence that Democrats in the House tonight have done much better than expected. Didn't get quite the shellacking that many Democrats on Capitol Hill were bracing for. She says in a statement, quote, while many races are too close to call, it is clear that House Democratic members and candidates are strongly outperforming expectations across the country. As states continue to tabulate the final results, every vote must be counted as cast. Many thanks to our grassroots volunteers for enabling every voter to have their say in our democracy. And Republicans on Capitol Hill, Don, are certainly sweating this out much more than they had expected. The fact that these races are tighter than expected, the numbers as they currently stand right now, of course, have Republicans on the path to winning a majority in the House, but it's not done yet. And certainly their majority potentially will be narrower than they had expected. And we heard from House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy in the last hour, and he claimed premature victory of sorts, taking an early victory lap. He said that he predicted that Republicans would win the House. He did not comment on that smaller than expected margin that they likely would have. And he said he read, in essence, the results as a mandate of sorts for the House Republicans going forward, saying, quote, work begins now. We need to set America back on track. So, Don, some dashing of expectations, high expectations that House Republicans had going into tonight. Still many key races, of course, in the House yet to be called.
Thomas Vadi at the voting desk, and I understand you have some. Give us some context on what's going on in Nevada with the vote count there, Victor.
Yeah, let's start there because the question is, where are the votes? When will we get the results? And let's take a tour here, starting in Nevada. Of course, we have covered over the last several weeks the concerns over drop boxes and security around those. Well, we know that the drop boxes will not be counted. We're now past Election Day. We're into the following morning. They could take until Thursday to count. And where are they? Of course, in the most populous counties. You've got down here Clark County, where we've got Las Vegas, the most populous county in the state, and then up here in Washoe County, where Reno is, and then much smaller Douglas County. Again, there is no way to know how many ballots have been dropped into those boxes, but those will be counted over the next several days. And while we're here, let's take a tour through Wisconsin. We're told that there are fewer than 12,000 votes to count in the Milwaukee County. That does not mean that there are 12,000 votes left to report. These votes that will be counted will come out with the next tranche of reported votes there, but 12,000 there in Milwaukee County. In Arizona, the estimate there in Maricopa County, the most populous county there with the biggest tranche of voters across the state, it'll take until Friday to count all those ballots. Of course, at the top of this hour, getting those new results, as John reported from Arizona, and the very tight governors and Senate races there. And in Georgia, where the prediction from Gabe Sterling with the Secretary of State's office, that's a prediction from the state, not a projection from CNN, is that race between Warnock and Walker will go to that December 6th runoff. What we're learning from Columbia County, a big amount of votes still out there is all the early votes. From Columbia, it's about 33,500. But as we saw from the map that John just showed us, still so many votes out in the Atlanta metro area that we are waiting for. So that's what we're getting, the latest of where the votes are, the count, and when we should expect those results.
All right, Victor Blackwell will check back. Okay, so this is a CNN projection. CNN can project that 5 additional House races here. 5 additional House races. First, we're going to go to Iowa. That will be a Republican hold there. That is where Marionette Miller Meeks will win over the Democrat Christina Bohannon. And then in Wisconsin 3, we have a Republican pickup with Derek Van Orden beating out Democrat Brad Pfaff. In New York's House race 2, we have a GOP hold with Republican Andrew Garbarino defeating Jackie Gordon. And New Hampshire 1, we have a Democratic hold there. Incumbent Chris Pappas winning over Caroline Leavitt. Also in New Hampshire, the Democrat there, Ann Custer in District 2, holds that seat against Republican Robert Burns. Robert Burns there. Pappas will hold on. Okay, so listen, let's talk about the balance of power. Okay, Republicans are getting closer, but they are still short of 218. That is the magic number. Let's go to the magic wall now and Mr. John Berman to see where every...
A lot of history being made in these midterm elections. Republican Sarah Huckabee Sanders will be the first woman elected governor of Arkansas, winning the office that her father once held for more than a decade. In my home state of Alabama, Republican Katie Britt has become the first elected female senator from the state, winning an open Senate race to succeed her one-time boss, retiring Republican Senator Richard Shelby. 25-year-old Democrat Maxwell Frost will be the first member of Generation Z elected to Congress. He just won Florida's 10th congressional district. Frost will succeed Democrat Val Demings, who vacated that seat to run for Senate unsuccessfully against Marco Rubio. Democrat Wes Moore is going to be Maryland's first black governor and just the third African-American ever elected governor in the United States. Anthony Brown just became the first black person ever elected Attorney General of Maryland. In Massachusetts, Democrat Maura Healey becomes the first out lesbian governor in U.S. history and the first elected female governor in the state. Republican Markwayne Mullin will be the first Native American senator from Oklahoma in almost 100 years, winning a special election to succeed retiring GOP Senator Jim Inhofe. And in Pennsylvania, Democrat Summer Lee will become the state's first black woman elected to Congress, winning the 12th congressional district there. A lot of history being made. The balance of power in Congress, though, is still undecided, even at this hour as we are closing in on 5 a.m. here on the East Coast. We are still watching 4 key Senate races. The votes are still coming in, so stand by, and we'll bring you a key update for those races.
Thanks so much. We'll check in with you shortly. We've got a CNN projection. Democrat Laura Kelly has won re-election for governor in Kansas. Her Republican opponent supported the 2022 failed state constitutional amendment to take away the right to an abortion. Let's take a look at the numbers. Here's where we stand on governorships across the country. Even with the Nevada and Arizona results coming in, there's a chance it could be another month until we know which party controls the Senate, thanks to Georgia. Let's check in with John here at the Magic Wall. What are you looking at?
Sorry, you just were talking about Kansas. We just called this race for Laura Kelly. She is an incumbent Democratic governor in a Republican state. She's leading right now, not even by 2 percentage points, but we project she'll win. How Republican is it? Let's go back 2 years and look what Donald Trump did there. Donald Trump won the state by 15 points, yet you have this Democratic governor who seems to be doing well. Or the reason, largely, for her continued success there has to do with Johnson County, where we see Kansas City. She's got big numbers up there. She's able to stretch her lead. So interested to see Laura Kelly winning there. Let's look back at the Senate, not in Kansas, if we will.
And welcome back to our special live coverage. We have several CNN projections to bring you. Brittany Peterson, the Democrat, has defeated her Republican opponent to become the representative for Colorado's 7th district. Also in North Carolina, Don Davis, a Democrat, has defeated Republican Sandy Smith. That's a hold for Democrats. In Pennsylvania, Democrat Chrissy Houlihan has defeated her Republican opponent as well. All of these races are Democrat holds. Let's walk over to John Berman, see how this may affect the balance of power. John?
So that brings Democrats up.
Do you think Republican leadership is reassessing Donald Trump's role in the future of the party?
Well,
actually, sorry, Congressman. Sorry, Congressman. We have a quick projection I just got to tell our viewers about. Two-term Republican Senator Ron Johnson has defeated his Democrat opponent, Mandela Barnes, to become the senator for Wisconsin. This has turned out to be one of the year's most competitive races. Johnson, a close ally of former President Trump, is known for a history of controversial statements, including misinformation about the COVID-19 pandemic and false statements about the January 6th Capitol attack. Let's take a look at how this impacts the balance of power in the Senate. This would give Republicans 49 to Democrats 48 in the Senate. CNN's Lucy Kavanaugh is following the race for Wisconsin. Lucy?
That's right, Anderson. This was an incredibly close race. The two candidates were neck and neck.
So we'll see exactly what he has to say.
All right, MJ, thank you very much. It is going to be crucial as we count down. We'll be getting you ready for that, for the president to give that press conference this afternoon. And still ahead, as we are still trying to count, still trying to see who will control the Senate, who will control the House. The latest from the tight Nevada Senate race as Democratic control of the Senate remains at this moment up in the air.
Herschel Walker, very, very close. Let's take a look at the latest numbers. Right up on the screen if we can. There you see 49.2% for Raphael Warnock, 48.7% for Herschel Walker, the Libertarian candidate, with 2.1%. If you don't get 50% plus one, there's going to be a runoff on December 6th. Looks like certainly there's going to be a runoff right now, even though it's so tight. They're both just below 50% right now in Georgia. We also have some projections that we're going to release right now. All right, in the state of Arizona, CNN is now projecting that Eli Crane, the Republican, will be elected to the House of Representatives from Arizona. This is the Arizona District number 2. Eli Crane looks like he's going to be the next representative from Arizona right now. That's one projection. We have another projection from Pennsylvania right now as well. Let's get that up on the screen if we can. Yeah, there you see it. Susan Wild, the Democratic incumbent, she is going to be reelected. We can now project, even though it says too early to call, we're projecting that Susan Wild will be the winner, defeating Lisa Scheller as well. Let's go over to John King at the Magic Wall. So we got 2 more projections in the House of Representatives. So set the scene for us, what that says to you.
Set this down right here. So you start, let's come back to the House of Representatives. I spent some time in...
CNN now projects that Democratic Senator Mark Kelly wins re-election in Arizona, pulling off a critical victory for his party. The former astronaut defeating the Trump-endorsed Republican Blake Masters in one of the most closely watched Senate races in the nation. Again, CNN projects Senator Mark Kelly wins re-election in Arizona. That means Democrats and Republicans now have won 49 Senate seats each. But Democrats are closer than Republicans to winning Senate control right now. They need only 1 more seat to lock up a Senate majority because the Vice President Kamala Harris has the tie-breaking vote. Very dramatic development right now. Dana, over to you.
This is huge, huge news. Mark Kelly, as Wolf said, former astronaut, he's already been in the Senate because he is filling the seat of John McCain. Now this gives him a full term. As he liked to say over and over again, he's been campaigning for 46 months straight because of that. This is a race that Democrats and Republicans were vying for, hoping that this could be one that would tip them over the edge. But it stays in Democratic hands. And Democrats and Republicans each are 1 away from, or Democrats are 1 away from locking up.
This is really an extraordinary development, just that we are sitting here talking about Democrats potentially retaining control, but really what we're talking about them is the potential that they could even expand a majority in the Senate, in part because this is a big piece of that puzzle. And when you think about Mark Kelly, he has always been a target for Republicans, really from day one, to take this seat back and put it back in Republican hands. And he has been walking this tightrope as a senator, trying to distance himself just enough from Washington Democrats, from President Biden, dealing with inflation as an issue, dealing with the border, which is a huge issue for him, but got a huge boost because he was running against a very Trumpy candidate, someone who, Donald Trump really inserted himself in this race. And I think both parties would agree. There's no question that helped him out in this race.
No, it absolutely did. And when Mitch McConnell has talked about candidate quality, much to the chagrin of Rick Scott and other Republicans who were trying to win the map over for Republicans, he's talking about people like Blake Masters, who was boosted by the billionaire Peter Thiel. But there was a lot of infighting among McConnell and others pulling money out of the race because they didn't think that he could win. And this is now borne out. And quite frankly, this is one of those seats where it's likely now that Mark Kelly has won this term, he could hold this seat for many, many years. I mean, this was really their absolute best shot at potentially putting this Arizona seat in Republican hands. But look at the map. If they win in Nevada, that's it. The runoff in Georgia doesn't matter. If Cortez Masto doesn't pull it out, we're still
doesn't matter for
looking
control
at a
of the
runoff
Senate.
for control of the Senate.
Think about where we were coming in. I mean, the Republicans were so bullish coming into Tuesday. They thought they were going to take the majority, 52 seats. Rick Scott even said back in October, 55 seats was even possible. Now they're looking at the possibility of losing a seat. It could be a 51-49 Senate. That is a realistic possibility for the Republicans. When you look back at this, looking at this cycle, it reminds me a lot of what happened to the Republicans in election cycles like 2010 and 2012, where they did nominate these candidates who turned out to be lackluster, underperforming candidates in the general election, costing them the clear chance of taking back the Senate majority in those 2 cycles. That is what Senator McConnell has been so concerned about, and that's what happened in Pennsylvania, that's what happened with Arizona, and it's a concern that could happen in Nevada as well.
Yeah, and we're talking about what this means on a national level and when it comes to the big picture in the Senate, but I just want to take a moment also to note that the only reason Mark Kelly ran for office in the first place is because he got involved in politics with his wife, Gabby Giffords, who was the one who people were looking at all those years ago to potentially, she was in the House, to potentially ultimately run in the Senate. She didn't get to do that. She was shot, almost killed. Yeah. Others were killed when she was just doing her job. She was meeting with constituents in her district in Tucson. And so while we're talking about where we are in the body politic, where we are in the electorate, I think it just sort of, it's important to take a moment and note that he's only there because of violence against a politician who happened to be his wife.
We have a huge projection to make. Look at this. Projection in the high-stakes battle for the United States Senate. CNN now projects that Democrats will keep control of the United States Senate, holding on to the majority they narrowly won 2 years ago. This is an extraordinary victory for the Democrats as the battle for control of the House continues to play out. We are making this call because we can now project that Democratic Senator Catherine Cortez Masto will win re-election in Nevada. Cortez Masto defying expectations and beating back a very strong challenge from Republican Adam Laxalt. Once again, CNN projects that Senator Catherine Cortez Masto wins re-election, sealing the Democrats' control of the United States Senate for another 2 years. All right, David Chalian, let me get your immediate reaction. That's major breaking news.
Well, major breaking news. Since Tuesday, we've all been waiting with the battle for control of the House of Representatives and battle for control of the Senate hanging in the balance. No more. Democrats will maintain their majority in the United States Senate. And as Neil was saying earlier, this is very good news for the Biden administration because things like judges and cabinet appointments and what have you, that will not be under the purview of Mitch McConnell to navigate through the Senate. That will be under the purview of Chuck Schumer, who will maintain his role as majority leader. So in terms of the balance of power shifting in Washington, with this Senate projection, it doesn't, because the most vulnerable Democratic incumbent figured her path to victory here. And I got to tell you, Wolf, on Wednesday morning in the wee hours after election night, Democrats were calling me and saying, even with Laxalt's big lead, they were saying, we think Catherine Cortez Masto is going to get there with what's outstanding. When that late mail arrives, we have a very high level of confidence, and they were right about that.
A huge win, Gloria, for the Democrats.
Oh, a huge win. And I think one of the things when we take a long view of this is that this may be the moment that we discovered that Donald Trump is not a kingmaker any longer. This is it. His candidates did not do well. His election denial was not a big issue in this campaign. And I think that Republicans are going to have to do an awful lot of soul searching about whether they actually ran on issues that were geared to them and how they could have lost the Senate with an election that was about inflation, that was about crime, that was about immigration. Yes, it was also about abortion rights, and democracy. But I think that the fact that the Republicans couldn't pull this off is going to force them to go to the couch and have a little bit of therapy and say, why did we do this? Were we following the wrong leaders? And how can we fix this? One short-term answer might be to tell your voters that they should vote by mail, because maybe it's easier and maybe more people do it. And you know, if you don't want to show up on election day as Donald Trump wants you to show up, just vote any way you want.
You know, I think what's interesting, too, is we talk about the problems that Kevin McCarthy is going to have over in the House of Representatives, regardless of what happens, and Republicans. But look what's happening in the United States Senate right now. You have the head of the campaign arm questioning Mitch McConnell and the future of the conference. You have Josh Hawley doing the same thing, a Missouri senator. You have Marco Rubio from Florida as well, somebody who you would think would be lining up behind Mitch McConnell. Republicans are going to have their own issues in the Senate right now, just trying to stay together. And Mitch McConnell, who has been bulletproof now for decades because he has really done such a very good job of keeping the Republican conference in order, has done an amazing job getting judicial nominees through. Now he's going to have a fight on his own hands within his own conference.
Because they were complaining, Mitch McConnell among others, about the quality of those Republican candidates who won the primaries, and now they're paying the price for it.
That's right, and they were talking about candidates in Georgia. They were talking about candidates not so much in Nevada, but certainly in Arizona, in New Hampshire as well. And we see what happened with that. We're going to enter into this period very quickly where Donald Trump looks like he is going to announce for president. What does that do to the calculus that Republicans have been making so far? Essentially, they've been afraid of the base of the Republican Party, which has been bonded to Donald Trump over the last couple of years. But now we see some of that fraying. You see some sniping at Donald Trump, the idea that maybe he shouldn't even announce heading into Tuesday, given the fact that there is a Georgia runoff coming up on December 6th. But we know he is a person who likes to suck up all the oxygen. He likes to take credit. He likes to have the sort of the roar of the crowd. And so far, even though there is this distancing, I think, from some Republicans from Donald Trump, it doesn't seem like that has necessarily trickled down to the base of the Republican Party, and that'll be the big question.
Well, we should just note, though, that December 6th runoff in Georgia now, it's an entirely different race.
Right.
Battle for control of the United States Senate is not going to hang on that. It's going to be a little less engaged, and probably not as much money spent. Not that it's not important to the people of Georgia, and not that Chuck Schumer would rather have 51 than 50 and not have to go to Joe Manchin for every single thing, or a power sharing agreement with Mitch McConnell. So it has ramifications. It's important, but without control of the Senate hanging on Georgia now, that will become an entirely different race. 100%.
And you know, one thing, the one Republican victor in all of this, as we look back on this election, is Rick DeSantis.
Ron DeSantis.
Ron,
Right.
Ron,
Yeah.
sorry, Rick. Ron DeSantis, somebody who
The
won.
governor of Florida.
Yes, who won overwhelmingly. Yeah, double digits. And lots of Republicans are now talking about as the heir apparent. So we don't know how that's going to turn out. We don't know what Donald Trump's future holds right now. But I would have to say that Ron DeSantis is somebody who rises above the pack.
Well, let's get some more reaction. This is major breaking news. We've just projected that Senator Catherine Cortez Masto will be reelected, defeating the challenger Adam Laxalt. And as a result, we've now projected that the Democrats will maintain their majority in the United States Senate. Ashley Allison is joining us right now. Let me get your reaction first, Ashley.
I'm excited for our country. I think Americans showed up. If there was ever a question of whether your vote mattered, these tight races tell you that every single vote matters. I'm so proud of young people. I'm proud of my generation, the millennials who showed up, Gen X or Gen Z who showed up, women who said you cannot take our constitutional rights away. It is an important moment. It's a historical moment in our country that we were able to hold the Senate. But I also think it is an opportunity for Democrats, particularly if Republicans hold the House, to draw a stark contrast. While Republicans may try to do oversight hearings and not really do things to improve the quality of life, for the Senate, now that it is still controlled by Democrats, to push an agenda that is for the working person. It is going to improve our economy. It will continue to solidify our democracy. So not surprised that we were able to do it, because so much was at stake and voters were very clear on that. But it's an important night for the party, but also our country for sure.
Let me get Scott Jennings into this conversation. What's your reaction? Scott, what happened here?
Well, number one, we did have candidate quality issues. I don't think that was really the issue so much in Nevada, which is the race that's just been called. But you look around the map and quite clearly moderates and independents just revolted against Republicans and voted for Democrats that they didn't really like. I mean, Joe Biden's approval rating in our exit polls was low. Most people said his policies were hurting and not helping the country. There's a lot of anxiousness and anxiety about the direction of the country, yet they stuck with the party in power despite all of their fears about the direction of the country. This ought to be a wake-up call to Republicans that if you want to be a majority governing party, you have to appeal to a majority of the American people. And we nominated a lot of candidates who were not able to do that at the behest of one person, Donald Trump. And we're heading into 2024. He's going to announce for president, and we're going to go through this whole thing again. We'll see if the lesson will be learned. I hope it will be.
Well, let's get Hillary Rosen to weigh in as well. Go ahead, Hillary.
Yeah. Well, let's look at some practical realities here, which is that, with the Democratic Senate, we can continue to confirm judges. Joe Biden has been very successful at confirming judges for the federal judiciary. He also gets to continue to govern, which means that he gets his cabinet and sub-cabinet officials confirmed when he needs them. We were looking at, a scenario where that might get a standstill. I agree with Ashley. This is a great moment for our country. I disagree a little bit that, that means we're going to get a big proactive legislative agenda. I just don't think the House of Representatives is going to let that happen under a Republican majority. But I think what we have in this, with this backstop in the Senate is that the president will get to continue to govern, that the, bad things won't happen, and we're going to walk into 2024 with a positive story to tell.
Kristen Soltis-Anderson, a huge win for the Democrats in the United States Senate right now, maintaining their majority. What is the message that sends from your perspective?
It's fascinating that in a year when you have only a quarter of Americans saying that things are headed in the right direction, that you are going to have, if Alaska and Georgia both turn out preserving their incumbent senators, every incumbent senator who is up for re-election is going to be going back to Washington. This was not a change year, even though there were so many signs that people were agitated and frustrated with the status quo. And I think part of this is you had a lot of voters, as Scott mentioned, who didn't necessarily like Joe Biden. They didn't necessarily love the way the economy was going, but that wasn't enough to get them to pull the lever for some of these Republican candidates in some of these big races.